If there's one invertebrate fossil that everyone knows, it's gotta be trilobites or ammonites. But just like trilobites, ammonites are familiar yet deeply misunderstood. People ask me all the time, hey, teacher Guigu, did ammonites actually go extinct? Look, this one's swimming around in today's ocean. This ammonite shell I bought looks so incredibly fresh. You sure it really died out with the dinosaurs? It has a shell and 8 legs. That's gotta be an ammonite, right? This shell is completely straight. Why would you call it an ammonite? Teacher Guigu, don't mess with me. This is obviously just a sea snail. How in the world is that an ammonite? Oh, I know this one. It's my tangled earbuds. See? The know-it-all blind spot strikes again. So today, let me take you through the heartbreaking evolutionary journey of ammonites. Let's begin. The story starts over 440 million years ago, way back in the late Ordovician period. Back then, the undisputed rulers of Earth's oceans were the original tentacled monsters, the nautiloids, only they weren't as neatly coiled as today's versions. Their fossils mostly look like animal horns, and hence their common name, nautiloids. Equipped with the best image quality eyes in the entire animal kingdom, explosive jet propulsion for movement, and tentacles, and beaked mouths that were absolutely top tier in both strength and agility, nautiloids were absolutely crushing it. Easy wins every single time, no contest whatsoever. They were basically like fish and shrimp today, monopolizing nearly every single swimming animal niche in the ocean. So naturally, as you might expect, they diversified wildly in all sorts of directions. Some of them, like Endoceras, chose to grow absolutely huge, becoming apex overlords terrorizing the ancient seas. Others, like Sactoceratids, chose to get fat and round, becoming nightmarish puzzles for PhD students who were desperately trying to classify them into proper categories. Still others, like Phragmoceras, chose to curve themselves into interesting shapes. One branch of these may have eventually evolved into today's Nautilus, extending this incredibly ancient lineage hundreds of millions of years more into the future. Yet, amid all this fanfare and diversification, one particular group stood out as peculiarly different, the orthocones. As the name suggests, their shells looked plain and pretty unremarkable compared to their relatives. But as we all know, everyone who claims to just want a quiet, simple life secretly has a hidden talent or two tucked away. Same exact thing with orthocons. Their skill points all went into one internal art, making babies. You see, nautiloids were apex predators with aristocratic lifestyles. For reproduction, the motto was always, fewer offspring, better quality for each one. Even today's Nautilus, long since dethroned from its former glory, still keeps that snobbish tradition going. But orthocones, maybe because they just couldn't outcompete the other nautiloids in direct confrontation, voluntarily dropped themselves down the social ladder. They copied the commoner's approach, making their eggs tiny and extremely numerous. And not only that, their newly hatched larvae, though clearly less developed than other nautiloids' babies, had a surprising upside. These little runs could actually drift out into the open ocean just like plankton. This seemingly simple trick yielded unexpectedly powerful results. By the late Ordovician period, the great Nautiloid dynasty was already in decline. Many of their families were fading into obscurity, yet orthocones rose up like dark horses, snapping up fallen nobles' territories like nouveau riche upstarts. Then, over 440 million years ago, catastrophe struck the world, the End Ordovician mass extinction event. It wiped out a staggering 85% of all marine species. The seas were emptied of life. In the post-apocalyptic wasteland that followed, orthocons' flood-like reproductive strategy let them claim territory with extreme efficiency, instantly making them the undisputed top dogs of the entire nautiloid family. But you know, everything in this world has already been priced by the ancient gods. Before too long, orthocons found themselves trapped in a reproductive arms race with each other. To grab more territory faster, a small group within them started laying more and more eggs, each one smaller and faster developing than before. Finally, in the early Devonian period, about 400 million years ago, they pushed this strategy to the absolute extreme. Twisted minds eventually twisted their very bodies, and they spawned an entirely new kind of tentacled creature, a true outlier in the tentacle family, Bactrites. If the old nautiloids always looked majestic and imposing, befitting an era's overlord, then Bactrites, well, as the name kind of suggests, were skinny as a stick. You see, to achieve the maximum possible growth speed, early Bactrites grew almost only in length, never really bothering to add any girth. Gone was the old dominance their ancestors once enjoyed. They could basically only hide among the seaweed, scavenging scraps and tiny bugs with their feeble little tentacles. But fate, as always, has a dark sense of humor. After the Endovician mass extinction, the Nautiloid family as a whole never truly recovered its former glory. And by the Devonian period, when Bactrites first arose, things got even worse because jawed fish had finally arrived on the scene, kicking them while they were already down. Bactrites were shocked to discover that their once dominant nautiloid cousins were suddenly being steamrolled by these new jawed fish. Especially in the apex predator niche, it was a completely one-sided slaughter. By the time they fully realized what had happened, Bactrites had inadvertently become one of the few still thriving lineages remaining in the entire tentacled family, suddenly poised to become the next generation mainstream of tentacle. Looking at their own twisted, withered bodies, could the heirs of former overlords really only survive in such a wretched, pitiful form? But the cold reality left them no real alternatives. As jawed fish steadily conquered every corner of the ocean, escaping their massive gaping jaws became a far more urgent problem than anything else. The Bactrites didn't yet know that this life-or-death crisis would inadvertently pull them out of the vortex of cutthroat competition among themselves, finally shifting their evolutionary trajectory elsewhere entirely. And so, the greatest revolution in cephalopod evolution began. Some Bactrites, seeing that their thin, brittle shells were essentially useless for defense against these new predators, pivoted their strategy entirely to swimming fast and dodging attacks. Their descendants would eventually go on to evolve into belemnites, and ultimately today's cuttlefish, octopuses, and many more creatures. I won't go into detail here. If you're interested in that story, hit like, subscribe, and let me know with a little nudge in the comments. Meanwhile, other Bactrites took a more traditional and conservative path, armor up and toughen the defenses. Counter to intuition, among early jawed fish, aside from a few absolute brutes like Dunkleosteus, most of them actually struggled to punch through mainstream armor by brute force alone. So they often favored another strategy instead, using their massive body size to just swallow their prey whole, and Bactrites' long thin shells were absolutely perfect for slurping down like a French fry. So, this particular group of Bactrites gradually restored their ancestors' sturdy shells while also curving them significantly, so they couldn't easily slide down a throat anymore. This evolutionary path quickly coiled their shells into a full circle over time. Smaller jawed fish couldn't easily swallow them whole, and bigger ones? Well, not really worth the bother for so little meat inside. This bought them a slim but crucial survival chance, and finally gave them a chance to evolve into our true protagonists today, Ammonites. Early Ammonites like ubiculites were basically just Bactrites with loosely coiled shells. But they quickly discovered some significant advantages. The original straight shell was convenient enough for swimming in a straight line, but created huge rotational drag whenever they tried turning. By coiling the shell up, their swimming agility improved dramatically. Soon species like baculites emerged Ammonites with tightly coiled shells forming a unified disc shape. More crucially, starting from them, the Ammonite family gradually shared the skeletal body structure inherited from their Bactrite ancestors. Whether we're talking about nautiloids, Bactrites, or Ammonites, though their shells could grow very long, most of that length was actually divided into watertight compartments called chambers, filled with only a trace amount of nitrogen gas. Their actual flesh only occupied the section nearest the shell, opening a relatively small space called the body chamber. Baculite's body chamber was noticeably enlarged compared to what Bactrites had, meaning they'd essentially reclaimed the muscular body of their ancient nautiloid ancestors and likely possessed truly exceptional swimming ability. But if they'd merely combined Bactrites' fertility with nautiloid's body configuration, Ammonite's fate would have been just a mollusk version of trilobites, nothing more. Ammonite's true greatness lies in a groundbreaking structural innovation: complex suture lines. Most tentacled creatures build watertight compartments inside their shells by simply building a flat wall, sealing off one chamber at a time. Nothing inherently wrong with that approach. But the chambers contain air. If these creatures wanted to dive deep into the ocean, excessive water pressure could crush their shells inward. This frustrating problem trapped the nautiloid family for ages in a narrow strip of shallow sea. Ammonites found a brilliant new approach. Consider this. A flat sheet of paper bends easily, basically useless for bearing any weight. But if you corrugate it, folding it into ridges, it gains enormous strength to resist pressure. That's exactly what Ammonites did to their internal chamber walls. Early Ammonites only folded these walls a few simple times, but over time the folds quickly grew more and more complex. Where the walls met the outer shell surface, they twisted into incredibly intricate curves. This is the key distinguishing feature separating Ammonites from all other tentacled creatures: suture lines. Ammonite evolution is essentially a history of increasingly complex suture lines developing over time. At their absolute peak, Their chamber wall morphology had grown as complex as gnarled tree roots, suture lines, so intricate as to be dazzlingly complex to behold. Thanks to this brilliant design, Ammonite fossils today rank among the most artistic fossils ever discovered, hence the beautiful name Ammonite. One more important point. Suture lines are located inside the shells, completely invisible from the outside. This clever design, without changing the volume or shell thickness at all, gave ammonites far superior pressure resistance, allowing them to freely dive into deep sea zones that their ancestors could never have dreamed of regaining freedom in this vast sea of ammonites. And here's an unexpected bonus. This complex chamber structure actually let ammonites use water's surface tension to rapidly fine-tune their ballast water levels, enormously boosting their overall agility. In terms of swimming ability, they could rival any competitor their own size. A great cataclysm once toppled the nautiloids from their throne long ago. Now these descendants of a fallen god have finally completed their transformation. In the future, yet another catastrophe will send them back to godhood once more. 40,000 favorites, and will update within a week. I'm Guigu. See you next time.